Hi, everyone. Welcome to the course of world history. I'm your host, Mr. Samuelson, and today is all about the Encomienda System. Our essential question of the day is what was the intention and what was the reality of the Encomienda System? So, the feudal system winds up being the kind of model for what the Spanish are doing in the New World with the Encomienda System. Um, in this system, a Spaniard would be placed in charge of an encomienda, which is like a fief. It's the land that is ruled, kind of like the land that a lord would rule. And they are in charge of governing this land. Now, Native Americans would then live in that land and were intended to be treated kind of like serfs were. That is, they're not property, but they're kind of tied to the land. They're not owned by the feudal lord. They can't be sold to somebody else, but they're also kind of locked in place. Now, an encomendero was the lord of that encomienda in this scenario. It's not a perfect translation here, but in reality, this is kind of how it played out. The encomendero would be in charge of the encomienda. And they received this grant for the encomienda, that's the land, think like a manor here, from the Spanish monarch. And generally, that encomienda would then pass from that encomendero to their children and be hereditary property. Not always, but generally, that's how it worked out. The encomendero, again, that lord like person, then had the right to demand goods and service from the Native Americans who lived on that land, just as a feudal lord would of their vassals, their serfs. So the relationship in theory was again based on that lord vassal serf relationship as you found in Europe a few years before this, and still in some places at this time. The encomenderos would provide protection and Christian education to the Native Americans, as well as food in hard times. You would be expected to kind of stockpile those food supplies so that your serfs, or your Native Americans in this case, could remain fed and healthy and productive. Native Americans then in turn were intended to provide some of their time for labor in the farms and mines of the encomienda. And this was really designed to be a labor sharing arrangement where they would work their own lands for their own benefit sometime, and the encomenderos' lands for the encomenderos' benefit at other times. Now, the reality was very different. The encomienda system was immediately abused by the encomenderos, who treated the Native Americans not like European serfs, but much more like slaves than serfs. That is, the labor was extremely long, extremely intensive. Native Americans were given virtually no time to work their own land to prepare food for themselves and their own family. Therefore, in order to feed their own family, they had to borrow from the encomendero and become indebted to them, which really tied them to that land in a permanent way. So they were not allowed to leave this land because they were indebted to their encomendero, and they were forced to do long hours of very intense, very difficult labor. So the living conditions on these encomienda were incredibly bad. Life expectancy was really short for Native Americans for all the reasons we've talked about in previous lessons. There's insufficient food, long hours of labor. This means, a weakened body, more susceptible to disease. And you add that to the poor living conditions, and disease was just rampant amongst the Native American populations within encomienda, leading to the deaths of many of them, and many when they were young. So once again, here's kind of our summary of the plan and the reality. The idea, kind of like the feudal system, the Spanish would protect and care for and Christianize the Native Americans, and in exchange, a portion of their time would be to work for the Spanish. But the reality was the Spanish forced long unpaid labor, did not protect them, seized Native American lands, and as a result, Native Americans became impoverished, malnourished, sick, and died from these harsh working conditions. Now, the encomienda system does eventually end. It ends largely due to the effort of Spanish missionaries. These are the people who are going around and Christianizing Native Americans. And they were appalled that these Native Americans who had been converted to Christianity and are now members of the Christian church are being enslaved and abused in this way. Christians should not be treating Christians in this way, the Spanish missionaries believed. And one in particular, this man right here, Bartholomew de las Casas, wrote a series of letters to the Spanish leader at this time, Emperor Charles V, in which he highlighted the abuses and he highlighted what these encomendero were doing to Christian subjects of the Spanish emperor. And as a result of this, Spain did outlaw the worst abuses of the encomenderos and put an end to some aspects of the encomendero system. But it's important to know that law and reality are two very different things. And while many of these actions became illegal and punishable by law, was that law enforced? Were the offenders punished? Barely. And so the system did not dramatically improve through the Spanish rule in the 1600s in New Spain. That is all for today. I hope that you did learn something through this lesson, and I will see you next time. Farewell.